Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. So what I've got for you today is a free hit team going into game week 3. I know a few of you are considering the free hit, so I've made this video to hopefully help you out with your decisions. If it does and you're new to the channel, please do subscribe, like the video. The support has been amazing and I am closing in on 500 subscribers. So if you can help me get there, I would really appreciate it. So why might you free hit? Well, maybe you've got Palmer this week and you don't want to sell him. You think he's going to be fit again for game week 4. Maybe you've got Arsenal and Liverpool players and they play each other and you want to avoid the fixture. Or maybe you just don't want to make permanent transfers before the actual transfer window shuts in the Premier League and you kind of want to have your settled squad. And this way you can attack the fixtures, have a weak bench and triple up on certain teams that you wouldn't normally do so. So the rating for this team is only 92% rated, which there's definitely higher ratings out there, but I think we're learning that, high ratings don't necessarily lead to the most points. It's a good baseline to have, but I don't think you should be afraid to deviate from that. Now, this team also only came in at 98.6 million. I am recording this on Wednesday night, so there might have been some price rises going into Thursday, but unless there's been 1.4 million worth of price rises, we should still be okay for everyone to afford this team. So in goal, I've gone with Matt Sells. Now, I do think it's really important in a free hit to try and target home fixtures. And West Ham at home is a really good point of entry. It's a really good fixture for Nottingham Forest. I think if West Ham were they were away at West Ham, it would be a bit more of a difficult decision. But I think just when you're at home, there's just a lot more chance of keeping a clean sheet. And Nottingham Forest, I believe, are second of all teams most likely to keep a clean sheet this game week. So the data speaks for itself. I also think Sells is doing fairly well this season. Nottingham Forest are yet to keep a clean sheet, but remember, we're not going for the biggest point scoring goalkeeper so far. We're trying to predict who's going to get the most points this game week. And with that in mind, I do still think it's worth having Dubravka on your bench. You could maybe, if you wanted and you had spare money in this free hit team, upgrade him to a bit of a goalkeeper who's playing for maybe a team with a better fixture. But I think it is still important to have a goalkeeper who is playing on your bench on that off chance Sells doesn't play for whatever reason. We've just seen Palmer get injured in the warm up. The same thing could happen to any player. So it is important just to have a bit of a backup there. Now, because Nottingham Forest are at home, I have doubled up on their defence here with Murillo. Now, if they were playing West Ham away, I probably wouldn't have done that. But like I said before, it is important to target teams who are playing at home. And that's also why I've got Delict in here from Man United. Now, Burnley at home is a great fixture. I think with the promoted sides, if they're playing their home, it's a little bit more difficult. But because Burnley are away at Man United, and you know, Delict, it's actually got defensive contribution points in both games so far. And he also got 3 bonus points in the last game against Fulham, even though he didn't have anything to do with the Man United goal. And there were 2 goals scored in that game. So he didn't get the clean sheet. So I think it's really speaks for itself that he is a good pick. And you could be on for a double digit haul here by getting in a player like Delict. Now, I know I've just talked about playing promoted teams away from home is a little bit tricky. And then I've gone for Dan Burn, who plays Leeds away. But I think the Leeds attack is a little bit up in the air at the moment, and they've not really got a settled striker. They've got Pirro there, who's was did well in the Championship, and they've also got Calvert Lewin, who it probably isn't ready to start at this moment in time. And the same with Delict. Dan Burn got defensive contribution points in both games so far. So I think he is a good player to get in, and it's quite a lot of money in defence. But I think it's worth it because again, you don't have to transfer these players out again. You can just go wherever you want. And if you did want to upgrade to a premium 6 million midfielder, defender, you can still do that with this team given the money we've got in the bank. Also have 2 4 million defenders on the bench. Very unlikely you're going to need them, but I think I've put Ronaldo there ahead of Estev because he plays Brentford at home, and I actually quite like the Sunderland defence against Brentford at home this week. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem starting him as well. I think they've got a chance of a clean sheet. So in midfield, I've gone for double Man United, and Bruno Fernandes is doing really well in his defensive contributions for a midfielder so far this season. He is pretty much averaging 12 defensive contributions per game, or he's very close to that. And I think having two Man United players or the Man United triple up, I would totally be fine if you had two Man United defenders and then one midfielder in here as well as you triple up. I wouldn't be afraid to triple up on certain teams for a single game week. You know, you're using a free hit, you might as well look at the fixtures and just attack those fixtures. And I know Man United haven't scored really. They've scored one goal so far this season in the Premier League. But Matthias Cunha did look pretty good and he was getting chances. I think it just needs a bit of time to click. And I wouldn't be surprised if they scored two, three goals against Burnley at home. And I think if they're scoring three goals, it's pretty certain that Matthias Cunha and Bruno Fernandes probably would be involved. Now, I know Bruno's not the hottest topic right now, given that he missed a pen, but it's such a big swing on such a small moment. You know, he scores that penalty. No one is even thinking of transferring him out. And I think this is the game you could get him in for. Now, I have highlighted Ismail Assar here, and you might be thinking, why are you bringing him in on a free hit when he's got Aston Villa away? Well, Ismail Assar, in his last five games against Aston Villa, I believe he's got seven goals. Because Aston Villa play with quite a high line, he's basically playing as a striker and he's just getting in behind. So I think he is a really good pick. So much so that I am actually thinking of transferring him in for Palmer this game week, sidestep into my own team for my own insights. I think he is the player that I would get in for Palmer, given that he plays Aston Villa away, and that's a good fixture for him. You know, Villa are going to be throwing players forward, trying to score because they've not scored yet this season, and the pressure will be on them at home. And then he's got Sunderland and West Ham straight away afterwards. I think it's a good time to get him in. And I think for one game week only, I actually think he's quite an underrated pick for this game week. Now, I've gone with Kudus and Jack Grealish to finalise the midfield. I think you could totally swap Grealish and Kudus around this game week. I think they would be the two players that I would interchange if you were playing with a four-man midfield with this team. Kudus against Bournemouth, even though that's at home, I think that's a good fixture for Spurs. He's not getting a ton of goal threat, but he is getting some assists. And Jack Grealish is just a bit of a fun pick, I think, for this week. You know, Wolves is a fairly straightforward fixture at the moment. We're yet to see what transfers will be made, for the rest of this week. But I think if you get into Thursday in the Premier League and a team is just making a transfer, that player is very unlikely to play at the weekend. So I think any transfers made from now shouldn't really affect players' minutes. And it's interesting to see how Everton are going to line up in this season and just how attacking they are going to be. And Grealish is the sort of player who could score in bunches. So he's first on the bench, but I totally don't mind him starting instead. So up front, I've gone for three pretty big strikers here. And I've been able to do that because there's no Salah in there. I think if you're free hitting this game week, you probably don't want Salah in your team. Otherwise, you kind of just go with it. Haaland is my captain. I think he is the player who is going to get the most chances. I think my vice captain would probably be on, I want to say Chris Wood. I think Chris Wood has the next biggest ceiling. But again, I think it's quite difficult to captain someone else other than Haaland. If you're free hitting, it probably is to get Haaland in. If you're getting Haaland in, you probably should captain him. I actually think the Chelsea game at home to Fulham is not super straightforward for Chelsea. You know, Fulham are basically down the street, from Chelsea. So it's not a proper away game. And historically, it is quite a tricky game for Chelsea. So João Pedro's in there just to kind of cover it, but I wouldn't necessarily see him as a captain option. Haaland is the player that's going to get the most attacking opportunities this game, and therefore I think he is someone who not only has the highest floor, as in I think he will score and get at least 6 points, but I could also see him getting a couple of goals and finishing on a 13-pointer, maybe even more. So overall, the strengths of using your free hit is that it avoids the tough fixture conflict. You know, if you've got a couple of Arsenal, a couple of Liverpool, and you don't like the fixture, kind of just avoids that sorted. And it also gives your injuries time to heal. You know, maybe you've got Palmer, maybe you've got an Ait Nori, and you're not using the free transfers yet. It solves that sort of issue. It's not like game week 4 is next week. You know, you've got a bit of a break with an international, lineups coming up. And that just gives you a lot more extra time for your actual team to kind of recover from these slight knocks and injuries than it would do in a normal, game week season. However, the weaknesses are that it does use the free hit. It's although you get two this season, it's not something that you can just use every week. So if you're using it now, it's a bit like using a free transfer earlier, in game week one. You maybe made a bit of a knee-jerk transfer after game week one, and now you're a little bit, tighter, a little bit restricted with your transfers because you don't have that same flexibility. You could expect the same thing later down in the season. If your team has worse injuries or there's a maybe a double or a blank game week for whatever reason, sometimes it's because of the weather or something around Christmas, that can happen. Or maybe there's another game week later down the line, I think in game week 6, where, people are talking of using their free hit because there's a good set of fixtures there. You couldn't do that then. So I'd maybe just look at the fixtures before you click the free hit button and just see, is there a better opportunity to use it? And it's also team dependent, right? I don't know everybody's teams, so I'm not necessarily saying you should use your free hit at this point, but I think if you're in a situation where you could use it and you want to use it, make the decision and go for it. Play your own game, do what you want. Hopefully, this team helps you out. You don't have to use everyone in there. There's definitely upgrades I think you could make depending on when you want to use, where you want to use the extra money. But I do think it's a really solid team. And if I was free hitting this week, I do think I would be using this team. So hopefully it's helped you out with your thoughts. Go check out my other videos as well. My own preview video came out a couple of days ago, and I've got a wildcard team video from the weekend as well that should be on the screen right about now. If you've made it to this stage in the video, please do subscribe. Comment your thoughts, comment if you're free hitting as well. It's always cool to talk fantasy league. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.